The galaxy changed after the Battle of the Corridor. Word spread about what the humans had done, how a handful of primitive ships had torn apart the command structure of the most feared military force in known space. The story grew with each telling. Some versions were exaggerated. Some were not exaggerated enough. But the core truths remained unchanged. The humans had faced impossible odds, and they had not run. They had sacrificed themselves to save strangers. Species that had remained neutral throughout the war began to reconsider their positions. The Korath sent warships to support the collective. The Thin offered their legendary engineers. Even the reclusive Veth, who had not engaged in interstellar affairs for centuries, dispatched observers to learn more about these strange creatures called humans. The Keth Dominion, for the first time in its history, faced a united opposition. The war did not end quickly. It lasted another 8 years. There were more battles, more losses, more sacrifices. Kevin Holt served throughout the conflict, eventually becoming chief medical officer for the entire Allied humanitarian corps. He never stopped working. He never stopped caring. And he never broke his promise to come home to Emma. Grace Liu was promoted to Admiral of the Combined Fleet. She was uncomfortable with the title and the attention that came with it. She had never wanted glory. She had only wanted to help. But she accepted the responsibility because the people needed her leadership. She guided the Allied forces through the darkest years of the war with the same stubborn determination that had marked her entire career. Daniel Porter received a new ship after the Steady Horizon was finally declared beyond repair. He named it the Second Chance and flew it into battle alongside the Admiral, who had become something like a friend. Lisa Park served as his first officer until the end of the war, then retired to write a book about their experiences. It became one of the most widely read accounts of the conflict. The turning point came in the 6th year, when the Keth and the Hound sued for peace. Their empire was crumbling. Species they had conquered were rising up. Their economy was collapsing. They could not fight a war on all fronts simultaneously. They asked for terms. The negotiations were long and difficult. Many in the collective wanted revenge, wanted to make the Keth suffer for everything they had done. Grace Liu argued against this approach. Vengeance would only breed more war, she said. The goal had never been to destroy the Keth. The goal had been to stop the suffering. In the end, a treaty was signed. The Keth Dominion was dissolved. Its member species were given the choice to join the collective or form their own governments. War criminals were tried and punished. Reparations were paid. And a lasting peace was established, enforced by a new galactic council on which humans held a permanent seat. High Counselor Thalen lived to see the end of the war. He was very old by then, his body failing, his 4 eyes dim. But his mind remained sharp and his heart remained full. On the day the peace treaty was signed, he addressed the Galactic Assembly one final time. "I have lived for nearly 400 years, he said, his voice thin but steady. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed wonders that defy description. But nothing in my long life has surprised me more than the beings who answered our call for help." He paused to gather his strength. "We sent a beacon into the void, hoping for gods. We prayed for the Ascended Ones, beings of infinite power who could reshape reality with a thought. We expected saviors who would sweep away our enemies and restore our worlds with a wave of their hands." His 4 eyes moved across the assembly, finding the human delegation sitting among the representatives of 100 species. "Instead, we got humans. Small creatures from a small world at the edge of nowhere. They had no great powers. They could not command the stars or bend time to their will. Their lifespans were measured in decades, not centuries. By every measure we used to judge potential allies, they were inadequate, insufficient, useless." A murmur went through the assembly. Thalen raised a trembling hand for silence. And yet they came. They came without asking what they would gain. They came without caring about the odds. They came because we were suffering, and they could not look away. They gave their food to our hungry. They gave their medicine to our sick. They gave their lives to protect our children. His voice broke. He took a moment to compose himself. They taught us something we had forgotten in our long history. Something we should never have needed to learn. Salvation does not come from above. It does not come from beings of infinite power. It comes from ordinary people who choose to stand beside you when they have every reason to run. It comes from the simple, profound decision to help. He looked directly at Grace Liu, who sat among the human delegation with tears streaming down her face. The humans did not save us because they were mighty. They saved us because they cared. They cared when no one else did. They stayed when everyone else fled. They fought when everyone else surrendered. And when they died for people they had never met, for reasons that made no logical sense. Thalen's voice grew stronger, fueled by emotion. That is not weakness. That is not irrationality. That is the greatest strength any species can possess. The strength of compassion. The strength of sacrifice. The strength of refusing to accept that some lives matter more than others. He bowed his head. On behalf of the Vellani Collective and all the species we represent, I thank the humans for everything they have given us. Not just their ships and their soldiers, but their example. Their reminder of what it means to be truly civilized. Their proof that greatness is not measured in power or lifespan or technology, but in the willingness to help others at any cost. He lifted his eyes one final time. We sent a beacon seeking saviors. We expected gods. What we got was humanity. And we have never been more grateful for anything in our long history. The assembly erupted in applause. It lasted for several minutes. On Earth, the returning heroes were celebrated with parades and monuments. Schools taught the story of the Vellani War. Children grew up knowing the names of Grace Liu and Kevin Holt and Daniel Porter and all the others who had answered the call. Grace retired from the military and bought a small house by the ocean. She spent her remaining years watching the waves and remembering the people she had lost. She never regretted her choices. She only regretted that she could not have saved more. Kevin Holt went home to his daughter. Emma was a teenager now, growing up too fast, already talking about following in her father's footsteps. He hugged her tight and told her he loved her. Then he showed her a photograph of a young Venari girl with orange feathers who was now attending university on Vellana Prime, studying to become a doctor. She wants to help people, Kevin said. Just like I helped her. Emma smiled. Can I meet her someday? I think that can be arranged. Years later, Sira came to Earth as part of a diplomatic delegation. She found Kevin in the crowd at the reception, old and gray now, but still strong, still kind. She embraced him without words, and they stood together for a long moment. Two people from different worlds who had found each other in the darkness of war. You saved me, Sira said finally. Not just my life, my soul. You showed me that there was still good in the universe. Kevin shook his head. I just did what humans do. Sira smiled, her feathered crest rising with joy. Yes, that is exactly what you did. And that is why the galaxy will never forget you. Across the stars, the legend continued to grow. The humans who had come when no one else would. The humans who had given everything for strangers. The humans who had proven that salvation was not about power or glory, but about simple, stubborn, unstoppable compassion. They had not been the saviors the Vellani expected. They had been something better. They had been human. 6 months passed. The human presence in Vellani space grew slowly as reinforcements arrived from Earth. More ships. More soldiers. More volunteers. The numbers were still small compared to the Keth war machine, but they made a difference. Human engineers rebuilt damaged infrastructure. Human doctors trained Volani medical staff. Human tacticians shared their unconventional approaches to warfare. And human soldiers stood beside Volani defenders on a dozen worlds, refusing to give up, refusing to accept defeat. Kevin Holt became something of a legend among the refugees. Stories spread about the human medic who never stopped working, who gave his own food to hungry children, who held the hands of dying patients, even when there was nothing more he could do. He was embarrassed by the attention, but he did not let it distract him from his work. There were always more wounded. There were always more people who needed help. The young Fenari girl, whose name was Sarah, followed him everywhere. She had no family left and nowhere else to go. Kevin wrote to his daughter Emma about her, describing the brave little girl with orange feathers who had lost everything but still found reasons to smile. Emma wrote back that she wanted to meet Sarah someday. Kevin hoped that day would come. Grace Liu coordinated the overall defense from her repaired flagship. She slept 4 hours a night and spent the rest of her time planning, analyzing, and preparing for the inevitable Keth counterattack. She knew it was coming. The only questions were when and how strong. She got her answer on a cold morning in the 7th month of the campaign. "Commander, we have a massive energy signature at the edge of the system," a sensor officer reported. Multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. The display filled with red markers. Grace counted them silently. 50, 100, 200, 300. The Keth had sent their primary invasion fleet, led by Warlord Sethrak himself. It was enough firepower to destroy every ship the Collective and their human allies could muster 10 times over. "Sound general quarters," Grace ordered calmly. "Get me High Counselor Thalon and all allied commanders on a secure channel." The War Council convened within the hour. The holographic display showed the tactical situation in brutal clarity. The combined Allied fleet numbered 78 ships. The Keth had 300. The math was impossible. Admiral Vareth spoke first, her voice heavy with resignation. "We cannot win this battle. Our only option is strategic withdrawal. Evacuate as many civilians as possible. Retreat to the outer territories. Hope the Keth overextend themselves." "They will not overextend," Thalon replied wearily. "They will pursue us until there is nowhere left to run. This is the end, my friends. We have delayed it as long as we could." Grace listened to the discussion without speaking. She studied the tactical display, running calculations in her head, considering options that no sane commander would consider. When the conversation fell into silence, she spoke. "There is another option." Every eye in the room turned to her. The Keth fleet is hierarchical. Their commanders control everything. Without orders from above, their captains hesitate. Without captains, their crews become confused. If we can destroy their command structure, we can create chaos. Enough chaos to cover the evacuation and allow the main fleet to escape. Admiral Vareth frowned. "How do you propose to destroy their command structure when we cannot match their firepower?" "By not trying to match it. We send a small strike force directly at their command ships. Fast ships, minimal crew. Their mission is not to win. Their mission is to get close enough to take out as many leaders as possible before they are destroyed." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what Grace was proposing. It was a suicide mission. "That is madness," Vareth said softly. "Those ships would be annihilated." "Yes," Grace agreed. "They would. But their sacrifice would buy time for everyone else to escape. It would show the Keth that we are willing to pay any price to protect our people. And it would give the Collective a chance to survive, to rebuild, to fight another day." Thalon looked at her with something like wonder in his 4 eyes. "You would ask your people to die for us?" "I would ask for volunteers," Grace corrected. I would never order anyone to make this sacrifice. But I know my people. They will step forward." She was right. When the call went out for volunteers for the strike force, every human ship answered. Daniel Porter, his vessel repaired and ready, was among the first. Kevin Holt requested transfer from medical duty to the boarding teams, explaining that he wanted to be where he could do the most good. Dozens of soldiers, engineers, and ordinary crew members added their names to the list. Grace selected 20 ships and their crews. She spoke to each volunteer personally, thanking them for their courage, making sure they understood what they were agreeing to. None of them backed out. None of them showed fear. They were scared, of course. Anyone would be. But they were also determined. The night before the battle, Kevin Holt sat in his quarters and wrote a letter to his daughter. He told her how much he loved her. He told her how proud he was of her. He told her about Sierra, the brave little girl who had survived so much suffering, and he asked Emma to be kind to her if they ever met. He sealed the letter and gave it to a communications officer with instructions to send it to Earth if he did not survive. Then he checked his equipment, said a quiet prayer, and tried to sleep. The battle began at dawn, local time. The Keth fleet advanced in perfect formation, their massive warships blotting out the stars. The Allied fleet arranged itself in defensive positions around the evacuation corridor, knowing they could not hold for long. And Grace Liu led the strike force directly into the heart of the enemy formation. 20 human ships against 300 Keth warships. It should have been over in seconds. But the humans had a few advantages the Keth had not anticipated. They were small. They were fast. And they were utterly, completely fearless. The strike force scattered as they entered the enemy formation, each ship picking its own path through the chaos. Keth gunners tried to track them, but the humans were already gone, weaving between larger vessels, using debris as cover. Refusing to be easy targets, Daniel Porter flew the steady horizon like a man possessed. He had been a cargo hauler for 15 years, and he knew every trick for navigating through tight spaces at high speed. He threaded his ship between 2 Keth destroyers, so close that their weapons could not depress low enough to target him. He emerged on the other side and found himself face to face with a command carrier. "Target the bridge," he ordered. "Everything we have." The steady horizon opened fire. Its weapons were weak by Keth standards, but at this range, they could not miss. The command carrier's shields flickered and failed. Its bridge exploded in a ball of flame. Daniel did not wait to watch it die. He was already turning, already looking for the next target. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships diving into the enemy formation, targeting command vessels, accepting damage that would have destroyed any other species. The Keth tried to respond, but their hierarchical structure worked against them. With commanders dying, subordinates waited for orders that never came. Ships hesitated. Formations broke apart. Kevin Holt was aboard a boarding shuttle that latched onto a Keth command cruiser. He and his team cut their way through the hull and fought through the corridors, heading for the bridge. The Keth warriors they encountered were larger and stronger and better armed. It did not matter. Kevin had lost too many patients to surrender now. He had promised Emma he would come home. He had promised Sarah he would protect her people. He fought with everything he had. The bridge of the command cruiser was a fortified position. The team lost half its members taking it. Kevin was wounded twice, once in the shoulder and once in the leg. But they got there. They killed the commanders. And then Kevin set the ship's reactor to overload and led the survivors back to the shuttle. The cruiser exploded just as they pulled away. The shock wave threw their shuttle into a spin, but the pilot managed to regain control. They were alive. Hurt and exhausted and barely able to function, but alive. The strike force lost 12 ships that day. 214 humans died in the assault. but they destroyed 14 Keth command vessels, including Warlord Sethrek's flagship. Sethrek himself survived by evacuating at the last moment, but his command structure was in ruins. The Keth fleet fell into disarray. Ships that should have been pursuing the Allied retreat stopped to argue about who was in charge. Formations that should have trapped the evacuation corridor broke apart. By the time order was restored, the Allied fleet was gone. Grace Liu made it out alive, though her ship was barely holding together. She stood on her damaged bridge and watched the casualty reports scroll across her display. 214 names. 214 people who had given everything so that others could live. She wept. She was not ashamed of it. Some losses were too great for any other response, but the collective had survived. The evacuation was complete, and the Keth had learned that humans were not enemies to be taken lightly. It was not victory, but it was hope. Word of the human relief effort spread quickly through the Keth command structure. Warlord Sethrek received the reports aboard his flagship, the Devourer of Worlds, and at first he did not believe them. New species did not simply appear from nowhere. New species certainly did not throw themselves into a war that was already lost. He reviewed the intelligence carefully. 12 ships from a species called humans. Origin point somewhere in an uncharted region of the galaxy. Technology primitive by Keth standards. Population apparently limited to a single solar system. No significant military capability. Sethrek was a veteran of 100 campaigns. He had conquered species far more powerful than these newcomers. The logical response was to ignore them entirely and continue with the systematic destruction of the Villani collective. But something about the reports bothered him. The humans were behaving in ways that made no strategic sense. They were exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. They were prioritizing civilian lives over military objectives. They were acting as if victory did not matter, as if the only thing that mattered was the people they were trying to save. It was either very brave or very stupid. Sethrek decided to find out which. He dispatched a strike force of 20 warships to the Finari system. Their orders were simple. Probe the human defenses. Gauge their response. Destroy them if possible. If not, gather intelligence and withdraw. The attack came without warning on the third day of the relief operation. Kevin Holt was treating a patient when the explosion started. The ground shook and the tent walls rippled, and suddenly people were screaming again. He grabbed the young Finari girl and pulled her under a table as debris rained down around them. In orbit, Grace Liu watched the Keth ships emerge from faster-than-light travel. 20 vessels, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in the human fleet. Her tactical display lit up with threat warnings and damage projections. The math was not good. All ships, battle stations, she ordered calmly. Form up on the new horizon. Cargo vessels fall back and continue evacuation operations. Military ships, prepare to engage. Captain Daniel Porter brought the steady horizon into formation alongside the other escorts. His ship was a converted cargo hauler with minimal weapons and almost no armor. By any reasonable calculation, he should have been running. Instead, he powered up his engines and prepared to fight. "You know this is crazy," Lisa Park said from her station. "I know," Daniel replied, "but I am not going to let those things get to the people on the ground. Not while I can still fly this ship." The battle began badly for the humans. Keth weapons tore through their shields and hull plating. 2 human ships were destroyed in the first exchange of fire. A third was crippled and drifting. The Villani defenders, already exhausted, fell back in disarray. But then something strange happened. The human ships did not retreat. They did not scatter. They pressed the attack, using tactics that made no sense by Keth standards. A destroyer used a damaged cargo module as a shield, ramming it into a Keth warship and detonating its fuel cells on impact. A frigate dove between two enemy vessels, drawing their fire and causing them to hit each other. Pilots whose ships were destroyed ejected into space and continued fighting with emergency weapons, targeting sensor arrays and communication dishes. Grace Liu coordinated the chaos from her bridge, her voice steady even as her ship took hit after hit. She watched the damage reports pile up, and she watched her people die, and she did not waver. There would be time for grief later. Right now, there was only the fight. Daniel Porter found himself flying straight toward a Keth cruiser that was targeting the evacuation transports. His ship was too small to hurt it and too slow to outrun it. So he did the only thing he could think of. He aimed for the cruiser's main weapons array and accelerated to maximum speed. "All hands, brace for impact," he announced. "Lisa, get to the escape pods." "No," she said firmly. "If you are staying, I am staying." The steady horizon hit the Keth cruiser at full speed. The impact tore through the enemy ship's weapon systems and triggered a chain reaction in its power core. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a small sun. Daniel Porter did not die. His ship was wrecked beyond repair, tumbling through the debris field, but the bridge was intact and his crew was alive. He watched through the cracked viewport as the Keth cruiser broke apart. "Did we get them?" Lisa asked weakly. "We got them," Daniel confirmed. Across the battlefield, similar acts of desperate courage were playing out. Human ships fought with a ferocity that the Keth had never encountered. They took losses that should have broken any fighting force. They kept coming anyway. Warlord Sethrak watched the battle from his flagship, far from the combat zone, but close enough to receive real-time reports. His strike force was winning in terms of pure numbers. They had destroyed 5 human ships and damaged several more. But his own losses were mounting in ways he had not expected. 3 Keth vessels destroyed, 2 more badly damaged. And the humans showed no sign of giving up. His tactical officer approached with a report. The human commander, the one called Liu, was still coordinating the defense. Her ship had taken severe damage, but she was still fighting. More importantly, the evacuation transports had escaped the combat zone. The mission to save civilian lives was succeeding, even as the military situation grew worse. "They are insane," the tactical officer said. "They throw away their lives for no strategic gain." Sethrak considered this. He had fought many species in his long career. He had seen courage and cowardice in equal measure. But he had never seen anything quite like this. The humans fought as if they did not care about dying. They fought as if the only thing that mattered was protecting the weak and helpless. They fought as if their own lives were a price worth paying. It was disturbing. It was also deeply impressive. "Order the withdrawal," Sethrak said finally. "We have learned what we needed to learn, my lord. These humans are dangerous, not because of their weapons or their ships or their tactics. They are dangerous because they do not know when to surrender. They do not accept the logic of power. They will keep fighting until every last one of them is dead." He paused, his dark eyes studying the battle display. "We will need a larger force to destroy them, and we will need to do it quickly, before their madness spreads to our other enemies." The Keth ships withdrew, leaving behind debris and wreckage and the glow of burning vessels. The surviving human ships regrouped slowly, their crews exhausted and wounded, but somehow still alive. On the surface of the Fenari homeworld, Kevin Holt emerged from the field hospital to see smoke rising from the distant city. He did not know what had happened in orbit. He only knew that the bombing had stopped and the Fines Raidford and Ree evacuation transports were still landing and taking off. The young Fenari girl stood beside him, her small hand clutching his sleeve. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering for her age. "You stayed," she said through the translation device. "The monsters came, and you stayed." Kevin looked down at her and felt his heart ache. He thought of Emma, safe and far away on Earth. He thought of all the children on this world who would never see their parents again. He thought of the soldiers who had died in orbit so that these refugees could escape. "Of course I stayed," he said quietly. "That is what humans do." The girl did not fully understand, but she understood enough. She held his hand tighter, and together they watched the evacuation ships rise into the darkening sky, carrying the survivors toward safety. Somewhere above them, Grace Liu was reading casualty reports. 87 humans dead, 3 ships destroyed, 4 more badly damaged. It was a victory of sorts. They had bought time for the evacuation. They had proven that the Keth could be hurt. But the cost had been terrible. She allowed herself one moment of grief. Then she straightened her shoulders and began planning the next operation. The war was not over. The people still needed help. And Grace Liu was not the kind of person who gave up. None of them were. The journey took 11 days. 11 days of traveling faster than light, crossing distances that would have taken centuries at normal speeds. The crew of the human fleet spent that time preparing as best they could. They studied the limited data from the alien signal. They ran combat simulations. They practiced emergency medical procedures. They tried not to think about what might be waiting for them. Grace Liu barely slept. She spent her nights reviewing tactical scenarios and her days meeting with her officers. She knew they were heading into the unknown with inadequate resources and incomplete information. She knew the odds were against them, but she had made a career of beating bad odds, and she was not about to stop now. When the fleet finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the bridge of the New Horizon fell silent. The view on the main display was devastating. They had emerged near a large space station that must have once been beautiful. Now it was torn apart, its metal skin peeled back like the rind of a fruit, debris floating in slow spirals around the wreckage. Beyond it, more ruins drifted in the darkness. Ships that had been cut in half, habitation modules with gaping holes in their sides, and bodies. Thousands of bodies, frozen in the vacuum, tumbling endlessly through space. "My God," whispered Lisa Park, who had transferred to the New Horizon as communications officer. "What happened here?" "War happened," Grace said quietly. "Keep scanning. Find me survivors." They found them. Refugee ships clustered around the dying star, their engines dark, their power reserves nearly exhausted. The ships were packed with aliens of half a dozen species, all of them hungry, all of them afraid. When the human fleet approached, the refugees scattered like frightened animals. "They think we are Keth," Grace realized. "Open a channel. Broadcast our translation of their distress signal. Let them know we received it. Let them know we are here to help." It took hours to convince the refugees that the newcomers were not enemies. Finally, a single ship approached the human fleet. It was small and battered, its hull scorched by weapons fire. A docking request came through and Grace granted it personally. High Counselor Thalen came aboard the New Horizon with 2 guards who looked too tired to fight. He was tall and thin, with blue skin and 4 eyes that studied the human ship with a mixture of curiosity and exhaustion. Grace met him in the docking bay with a small honor guard of her own. "I am Lieutenant Commander Grace Liu of the United Earth Fleet," she said through her translation device. "We received your signal. We came to help." Thalen stared at her for a long moment. His 4 eyes blinked in a pattern she could not read. Then he spoke, and his voice was heavy with something that might have been disappointment. "You are not the Ascended Ones." "No," Grace admitted. "We are not. The beacon was meant to summon beings of great power. Beings who could defeat the Keth with a thought. Beings who could restore what we have lost." Thalen's voice cracked. "Instead it brought you. small creatures from a small world. You have no psychic abilities, no energy shields, no regenerative biology. Your lifespans are measured in decades. By the standards of this galaxy, you should not have survived your own planet. Grace listened without interrupting. When Thalen finished, she nodded slowly. Everything you say is true. We are not gods. We are not even a major power by your standards. We have only known space travel for 200 years. We have never fought an interstellar war. We have 12 ships and limited supplies and absolutely no idea what we are doing. She paused and looked Thalen directly in his 4 eyes. But we came anyway. And we are not leaving until we have done everything we can to help. So my question for you is simple. Where do you need us most? Thalen did not know how to respond to this. In his experience, beings offered help in exchange for something. Power, resources, political advantage. This small human, with her soft skin and her short lifespan, was offering help in exchange for nothing. It did not make sense. The Fenari homeworld, he said finally. It is under siege. The population is starving. Our defenders are overwhelmed. We have been trying to evacuate, but we do not have enough ships. Grace turned to her tactical officer. How long to reach the Fenari homeworld? 6 hours at maximum speed. Then we leave in 1 hour. Use that time to transfer supplies to these refugee ships. Food, water, medical equipment, everything we can spare. She looked back at Thalen. Come with us. Show us what we are dealing with. The fleet arrived at the Fenari homeworld to find chaos. Keth warships circled the planet like predators waiting for wounded prey. On the surface, cities burned. In orbit, a handful of Fenari defenders fought a desperate holding action, buying time for evacuation ships that were too few and too slow. Grace assessed the situation quickly. The Keth had overwhelming firepower, but they were not pressing their advantage. They were content to wait, to let fear and starvation do their work for them. It was cruel and efficient, and it told her something important about her enemy. They expect us to give up, she said. They expect us to see the odds and run away. Any rational being would, Thalen replied. Then it is a good thing humans are not always rational. Grace opened a channel to the fleet. All ships, this is Liu. We are going to run supplies to the surface. Cargo vessels will make the drop. Military escorts will provide cover. Medical teams will deploy to field hospitals on the ground. This is not a battle. This is a rescue operation. Our job is to save as many lives as possible. Questions? There were no questions. Kevin Holt was on the first shuttle down. The landing zone was a field outside a bombed city, and even before the shuttle doors opened, he could hear the sounds of suffering. Crying children, screaming wounded, the low moan of beings who had lost all hope. He grabbed his medical kit and ran toward the nearest field hospital. It was a tent city filled with injured Fenari, and the few doctors on site were completely overwhelmed. Kevin did not speak their language. He did not know their biology. He had a translation device and a medical scanner and a stubborn refusal to let anyone die on his watch. He worked for 20 hours straight. He treated burns and broken bones and wounds from weapons he did not recognize. He held the hands of dying patients and did his best to comfort them, even though they could not understand his words. When his supplies ran low, he gave his own rations to the children because their crying reminded him of Emma. A young Fenari girl with bright orange feathers watched him work. She was perhaps 10 years old by her species standards, and she had lost her family in the bombing. She did not speak and she did not eat. She just sat in a corner of the hospital tent and stared at nothing. Kevin knelt beside her during a brief break. He did not try to talk. He just sat with her in silence, letting her know she was not alone. After a while, she leaned against his shoulder and closed her eyes. It was the first time she had slept in days. Fallon observed all of this. He watched the human ships running supplies through enemy fire. He watched human engineers repairing damaged infrastructure with whatever materials they could find. He watched human soldiers standing guard over refugee camps, tired and scared but refusing to leave their posts. "I do not understand," he said to Grace as they stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching the operation unfold. "You have nothing to gain from this. You are risking your lives for beings you have never met. Why?" Grace thought about the question for a long moment. "Because we can," she said finally. "Because we are here, and you need help, and that is all the reason we need." Fallon looked at her with his 4 tired eyes. He had lived for 300 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had negotiated with 100 species. But he had never met anyone quite like these humans. "You are strange creatures," he said softly. Grace smiled. "You have no idea." The war had lasted 30 years and the Villani Collective was dying. 12 species had once called this federation home, and they had lived in peace for centuries. They had built great cities on 100 worlds. They had shared knowledge and art and hope. But the Keth Dominion had come like a plague from the outer darkness, and nothing had been the same since. The Keth did not negotiate. They did not trade. They consumed. Their empire stretched across 1,000 star systems, and every one of those systems had been taken by force. They stripped worlds of resources and moved on, leaving only ash and silence behind them. The Villani had tried to fight. They had tried to reason. They had tried everything their civilized minds could imagine. None of it worked. High Counselor Thallon stood in the Chamber of Stars on the capital world of Villana Prime. He was old now. His blue skin faded to pale gray, his 4 eyes dim with exhaustion. Around him sat the representatives of the surviving species. There were not many left. The Fanari delegation was down to 3 members. The Korath had sent only 1. Some species had no representatives at all because there was no one left to send. The holographic display in the center of the chamber showed the current state of the war. Red markers indicated Keth territory. Blue showed what remained of the collective. There was very little blue left. "We have perhaps 5 years," said Admiral Vareth, the military commander. Her voice was flat with defeat. "Perhaps less. Our shipyards are destroyed. Our fleets are scattered. We cannot win this war." Thallon had known this for some time. He had simply not wanted to say it aloud. Saying it made it real. But now the truth hung in the air like smoke, and there was no escaping it. "There is one option we have not tried," said Counselor Myra of the Fanari. She was young by her species standards, barely 200 years old. Her feathered crest lay flat against her skull, a sign of deep distress. "The precursor device." A murmur went through the chamber. The precursor device was ancient, older than any of their civilizations. It had been discovered on a dead moon at the edge of known space, left behind by beings who had vanished millions of years ago. No one knew exactly what it did. The inscription spoke of a beacon, a call for help that would reach across the stars to summon the Ascended Ones. Legend said these beings were like gods, powerful beyond measure, capable of reshaping reality itself. Most scholars believed it was a myth, a desperate hope from a desperate time. But desperate times had come again. "We do not know if it works," said Thallon slowly. "We do not know if the Ascended Ones exist. We do not know if they would help us even if they did. We know we will die if we do nothing," Mira replied. "Is a small chance not better than none?" No one could argue with that. 3 days later, a team of engineers activated the precursor device. It hummed with power that should have been impossible, drawing energy from sources they could not detect. A pulse of light shot outward, faster than any ship. faster than any signal they had ever created. It vanished into the void, carrying with it a message of desperation, images of burning worlds and dying children, and a single phrase repeated in every language the device could translate. "We are dying. Please come." Then they waited halfway across the galaxy, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. A man named Daniel Porter was having a bad day. His cargo vessel, the Steady Horizon, had developed engine trouble somewhere between Mars and the asteroid belt. He was 3 days behind schedule, and his employer was not happy about it. Daniel was 42 years, old with gray starting to show in his brown hair and lines around his eyes from too many years squinting at navigation displays. He had been a cargo hauler for 15 years, ever since the discovery of faster-than-light travel had opened up the solar system to commerce. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and he liked the quiet of space. He was running diagnostics on the port thruster when his communication officer, a young woman named Lisa Park, called him to the bridge. "Captain, you need to see this." Daniel floated through the corridor and pulled himself into the command chair. Lisa pointed at the main display. A signal was coming in, stronger than anything they had ever received. It was not from any human source. "What am I looking at?" Daniel asked. "I have no idea," Lisa admitted. "But the computer is translating it." The message played. Daniel watched images of alien cities burning, of creatures he had never seen running in terror, of ships exploding in the darkness of space. And through it all, a voice speaking words that the translation software rendered in flat, mechanical English. "We are dying. Please come." Daniel sat in silence for a long moment. Then he reached for the long-range transmitter. "Earth Command, this is the Steady Horizon. We have received an extraterrestrial signal. Coordinates and data attached. You are going to want to see this." The response from Earth was swift. Within hours, the signal was being analyzed by every government agency and scientific institution on the planet. Within days, the world knew that humanity was not alone in the universe. And within weeks, a debate was raging about what to do. Some argued for caution. Humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago. They had colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, but they had never ventured beyond their own solar system. They had no idea what waited out there. Getting involved in an alien war seemed like madness. Others argued for action. The images in the signal showed suffering on a scale that was hard to comprehend. Children of species humanity had never met were dying by the millions. Could they really just ignore that? Lieutenant Commander Grace Liu followed the debate from her office at Fleet Command in Singapore. She was 38 years old, a tactician who had made her name during the Mars colony uprising 10 years earlier. She had a reputation for creative thinking and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She also had a conscience that would not let her sleep while those images played on every news channel. When the call came asking for volunteers to lead a reconnaissance and humanitarian mission, she did not hesitate. The fleet that assembled was not impressive by any galactic standard. 12 ships, mostly converted cargo haulers and outdated military vessels. They carried soldiers, doctors, engineers, and volunteers. They carried food and medicine and building supplies. They did not carry hope of victory. They did not even know if victory was possible. They simply carried the determination to help. Among the volunteers was a combat medic named Kevin Holt. He was 35 years old, a veteran of 3 peacekeeping missions. A father of a 6-year-old girl named Emma. He had watched the alien signal with his daughter in his arms, and he had seen her eyes fill with tears at the images of suffering children. He had kissed her forehead and told her that someone would help those children. Then, he had signed up to be that someone. The fleet departed. Earth on a cold morning in March. Billions. watched as the ships accelerated toward the edge of the solar system, then vanished in flashes of light as they jumped to faster than light speed. They were heading toward coordinates impossibly far away, toward a war they did not understand, toward aliens they had never met. They were not saviors. They were not gods. They were just humans, but they were coming.